Welcome to BookTrib Live, a Merrill Moss Media production. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Arnof Fishman, author of Marketing to the Millennial Woman. Anne has been at the forefront of major generational trends for more than 2 decades, received 4 U.S. Senate research fellowships, and she founded Generational Targeted Marketing LLC, which has provided generational guidance to some of the country's best-known companies. She also has worked extensively with the U.S. government and is a former adjunct professor at New York University. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So you were pretty involved in politics, and I'm wondering, after watching the most recent Republican and Democratic debates, if you had any thoughts to share.
Well, I really have to watch every debate for work. So after watching 3 Republican debates and 1 Democratic debate, I would say there's a tremendous amount of disrespect being shown to the voter. Forget about the moderators for the moment, forget about the candidates, but people your age, this is your future. And it's really critical that you elect the right person, the person that is going to help build your future. So I would say that my takeaway from watching all of these debates is that they're not showing younger generations, Generation X, Millennials, the respect that they deserve. And I really, for the life of me, I don't know why.
That's very good point. All right, so I guess we'll jump into the questions now. So to start off, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your book, Marketing to the Millennial Woman, and how you came to write it.
Well, I wrote it because I got tired of reading articles about no one understands millennials, not even millennials. And I thought this is such a great generation. This generation will change America and it will change the world. And I thought that they hadn't been examined in the right way, in that you have 80 million millennials out there, 1/4 of the population of the United States, almost 40 million women, almost 40 million men. And for that reason, if you don't understand them, if you don't pay attention to their values, their attitudes, their lifestyles, then you're going to either be behind the curve if you're in business, or you're not going to run your company properly, or you're not going to get out the vote properly, or you're not going to be able to get money for your nonprofit. So if it involves people, it involves a generation. And in this case, I felt like the millennial generation, which is a great generation, had been dreadfully overlooked and had not really been properly understood. So I just, so again, I thought there was a need for it.
Great. So more than 1 in 3 American workers today are millennials, and this year they surpassed Generation X to become the largest share of the American workforce. How is this number changing the workforce, would you say?
Well, imagine that you're the boss, and all of a sudden you have all these millennials coming in. And you may be an Xer or you may be a boomer, and they work differently. They're not younger versions of you. So how do you get them to, the goal here is to have the most effective, most efficient company, the workforce that you can have. So if you do not understand what millennials value, what causes them to do the things they do, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, then how can you properly run a workforce? And to get out your product or your service, you really want those millennials to do well. And they want to do well, too. So it's really, it's important for bosses and managers to understand that millennials, as I said, are not younger versions of you. They have their own values, attitudes, and lifestyles. If you understand that, you're dynamite. If you don't understand that, you're going to have failure after failure. And this is key.
Very interesting. So you say that millennials are game changers. If you don't see it yet, you risk missing out on some of the most important cultural, business, marketing, communications, and demographic trends of the early 21st century. How so?
Well, let's just take it like a laundry list culturally. There are very few programs for the arts in schools anymore. And frankly, for all the right reasons. We need to be putting the focus on math, technology, science. But if you're a great museum, or if you're a symphony orchestra, or if you're on Broadway, or at any level within the arts, you have to figure out ways to reach millennials so that they will come to appreciate the arts, and that they will support the arts and make, help our cultural life remain rich and full. So if you don't understand them, and you don't understand that they're not getting it at school, and they may not be getting it at home, then what can your outreach be as a member of the arts to help them understand and appreciate it? If you're in business to make money. So you want to be focused on making money and pleasing your clients and customers. You don't want to be focused on a workforce that doesn't work well together. The Gen Xers are not getting along with the millennials. Millennials are not getting along with the boomers. So that shouldn't be your focus. I hear an awful lot about conflict resolution. I hear an awful lot about sexual harassment. And part of this is because one generation does not understand the other generation. So this is key. You do have to not only understand, but respect and actually honor the differences. It makes a huge difference in the type of product you put out.
Definitely. So what determines a generation's values?
The history that occurred during their formative years causes a generation to have certain characteristics. Generational characteristics, in turn, create a generation's values, attitudes, and lifestyles. And I want to give you a great example here. If your formative years were during the Great Depression, you probably are thrifty. I'm not trying to tell you that everyone in a generation is alike, but living through the Great Depression would tend to make you thrifty. If your formative years were during the Vietnam and Nixon era, then you probably tend to question authority. That's the way it is with every generation. There are historic moments that happen to large groups of people, and the general time span is about 20 years. And you see these same influences repeated over and over and over again, so that a generation really is a group under the same influence, even though they're individuals.
It's really interesting. Thank you. So what makes millennials so different from any other generation?
Well, their number, 80 million people, 1/4 of the United States population. The women in this generation are very different, but we can get to that later. But I want you to imagine the power of 80 million Americans. And what they are interested in is what you should be interested in, because they're going to be the ones who are going to work for you, take care of you, lead the country one day. And I want to tell you one way I'm already noticing it in business, which I find really funny. Every time I go to Whole Foods, there is a sign up about what they're supporting. And sometimes they support what's killing off the honeybees. They want to find out honeybees are critical to life. So they're supporting things like that. They're trying to put salad bars in public schools. Almost any business you walk into today has a cause. And that is because of millennials. So again, that wasn't like that. Every business didn't have a cause before. So millennials are making a tremendous difference in how we do business. You're very powerful. And therefore, that you have to respect your own power, because it matters. It really does matter what you do, how you think, how you vote, how you work, and you are going to make a difference.
So sort of in the same vein as that previous question, how do you connect with consumers' values, attitudes, and lifestyles by generation?
Well, the first thing you have to do is look at your product and service. Who is the likely person to buy this product and this service? And it may be all generations, or it may be just 2 generations, or it may be 1 generation. For example, when Microsoft kicked off Windows 95, they went after 2 generations. They went after baby boomers and they went after Gen Xers. So what did they do? They used Rolling Stones music, which had never been allowed to be used for commercial use before. and they did very choppy MTV editing to attract Xers. So you see, you can do multi-generational outreaches here, but you have to know what you're doing. What you don't want to do is to offend one generation in your attempt to attract another generation. For example, there's a generation called the silent generation, and this is the generation that grew up 1925 to 1942. And they grew up with the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. They had great role models like Generals Eisenhower and Patton, great presidents. And this generation respects authority. They really follow the experts when it comes to making a decision. Then turn around and you have baby boomers who question authority. So if I'm marketing to both the silent generation and baby boomers, I have to be real careful that that's not one of the nuances that I'm going to use, because you can really turn off baby boomers by saying I'm the expert, and you can really turn off the silent generation by saying experts don't matter. It's all about what my peers think. So this is critical. This is why you get business, why you lose business. This affects anything that has to do with human beings in America. I only deal with American generations. So that's why.
Wow, that's really interesting how that all kind of comes together. So you say that millennials have characteristics that are driven by the history of their youth. And you talked about this a little bit before, but more specifically in respect to millennials, can you explain this, how the characteristics of millennials are driven by the history of their youth?
Well, you've heard the jokes about millennials getting participation trophies and trophies for just showing up.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because this is the first generation in three. Boomers are individuals. Xers are individuals for very different reasons. Focus on the individual rather than the team. Millennials focus on the good of the group. They are very group oriented. So all this team spirit, they've been team taught, team graded, given trophies for simply showing up and participating in team sports. So this is the generation that is going to reunite a divided America. So that is, to me, there are many, many things that make them different from the other generations. But the one that I really love about millennials is their team spirit. Think about it. They have BFFs. They are constantly in touch with their friends. They don't make a move without letting their friends know it. So this generation is a unifying generation. They're also a very optimistic generation. So you put optimism together with unification, and you end up with an America that is we're not going to have these terrible divisions that we do now. We presume we will always have them. We won't. It's a generational thing that's been driven by baby boomers. So you need new generations coming on board. And so that is one of the things that I think is the most exciting about millennials.
That is really exciting and encouraging as well.
Yes,
definitely. It is. So baby boomers are still very present in the job market. Is it possible for these two very different generations to work cohesively in the same workspace?
Well, one of the things that causes, yes, of course it's possible if you know how to encourage people to work. One of the weaknesses is that there was a certain period where there was a downturn in the economy, and nobody hired an entire generation called Generation X. Generation X would have made this wonderful transition from boomers to millennials, but because no one was hiring in the workforce, Gen Xers went out and became entrepreneurs. And so you're having to leap over one generation who would have walked you nicely into the world of millennials. And so, yes, they can get along, but I will tell you that millennials are driving baby boomer bosses crazy because boomers expect millennials to be younger versions of them. Millennials expect boomers to be older versions of them. I had someone the other day say to me, a boss, he said, "Do you know they expect me to do the telephoning?" He said, "I'm the boss, and every time there's a call to make, would you mind making this call?" And he said, texting, emailing, everything else they're fine with. But he said, at least I finally understand that they're living in their world and I'm living in my world, but there are reasons why This is, I mean, they speak on the phone, but not in a business-like way. So they don't really have the how to. And this is really critical for employers to know and businesses to know. Because millennials are so digitally driven, they're on their devices all the time, they're losing some of their people skills. And it doesn't mean that you can't turn around and talk to your best friend beautifully. But the point of it is that you are losing. What this generation is losing, they're losing the ability to recognize facial cues, visual cues, body language. You almost get a blank stare sometimes when you talk to a millennial because they're not reading your face. And this is something that human beings read each other. And you don't. You look down and you don't look up at the face. If you cannot say what color that person's eyes were the time you finish that conversation, you're not reading the face well enough because you ought to be intently focusing on what that person is saying and on that person, not hearing the vibration in your purse indicating that you've got a call coming in and you really want to take that call. So these things are key in getting these two generations to work together. Another thing I find really interesting is that this generation needs to be watched from day one and trained from day one. This is the tell-all generation. They can't wait to get to text, to tell you everything they do. It's just going on every minute of their lives. What does that do to American business? It means that we are giving away business secrets. We're telling you about the boss. I read an incredible story about a woman who applied for a job in a nursery school, and she got the job. And immediately she went on Facebook and told people, her friends, that she got the job and how much she really couldn't stand children, but she was glad she had a job. She was fired before day one. So if you have a business that requires some degree of privacy, remember that this is the tell-all generation and that you really have to let them know what is to be kept private, what can be told publicly, because you can really do great damage to a business if you tell too much. Look at Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden's a prime example of, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he walked out with all the information on a memory stick. And this can happen to you. It can happen to any business, small or large. So you have to let your employees know how to read facial cues, proper manners, what's private, what's public. And on the other hand, you have to let your bosses know correct use of social media. They don't know. They don't know that a tweet was not meant to be, what's meant to be just a conversation, a thought, a comment. One of the reasons that Trump does well is that he tweets like a millennial. I mean, it's just coming out of, this is what I think, this is what I'm telling you. So it's really important that if you're going to go to the trouble to tweet, if you're going to go to the trouble to have a Facebook page, if you're going to go to the trouble to do these things, that you know what you're doing. And this is where the younger employees, the millennials, can teach you. So you see, it's really working together to create a really wonderful workforce.
Definitely. I'm learning so much. This is great. Thank you. So how can millennials affect commerce? That's my next question.
Well, by their buying power. Again, as I told you, they will not buy at certain companies if there are practices that company does. Every time I read something on a blog that talks about children in a foreign country kind of being like laborers to build a product, I know that company is going to take a hit. Anytime I read about something that offends a generation, then I know that company is going to take a hit. This is as much about knowing what not to do as what to do. So consequently, a millennial worked in the summers as a maid to get her money to put down a deposit on a car. She went into a car dealership, and they didn't even pay any attention to her. She was 16 years old, and they paid no attention to her. She had done her research online. She'd earned her own money. She was ready to buy a car. She loved the car she saw. Not only did she not buy from them, she turned around and did more research, bought a different car, but then she convinced her best friend to buy the same brand. So you see, every action with the millennial is key because they can tell their friends of a bad experience. and you're going to be a viral video before you know it. Or they could say, look, you have got to go to this store. You have got to buy this product. You have got to meet this person. You have to understand that that's 80 million people telling each other how good or how bad you are.
Yeah, definitely. That puts things in perspective. Wow, 80 million people. So you,
Well, you used to hear about the 500-pound gorilla. Now it's the 80 million people generation that you have to be really, really knowledgeable about, and in an orderly way. There is so much to know about this generation. You can grab an article here, grab an article there, but you have to put it in proper order so that when you can't start reviewing your notes when a millennial walks up. You have to kind of have certain things that you know about them. I almost feel as if I know people before I get to know them because I know their generation. If I'm talking to somebody who's from the World War II generation, I'm halfway there. If I'm talking to you, I'm halfway there. And it's not just me, it's people who understand what you went through during your formative years, what it's like to be you, what it's like, what shows you watch. I mean, I shouldn't be the only person my age who had to watch Buffy all the way through. I enjoyed it, you know. So it's like you've got to know what you're about for me to deal with you.
Definitely, definitely. So we have a question here from one of our viewers, Evan. He would like to know, if you were to tell me one thing about millennials that most people don't know, what would it be?
I would say, well, the one thing I would have said would have been that this is the generation that is going to reunite America. This is, even if they're on different sides, different political sides, they will work together because that is their focus. The other thing I would say is that for the women of this generation, they are living the feminist movement's dreams, and therefore they have choices. They are 15% of the military. They are Army Rangers. They can apply to be Navy SEALs. They can be stay-at-home moms. They can choose to raise pets. They have choices. So I know the Pope even came out in an address that said, please raise children, not dogs and cats. This generation is a generation of choices. And for that reason, I'm not so sure. I keep being drawn back to politics. There's an important woman on either side right now. There's an important Democratic woman. There's an important Republican woman. I'm not so sure that young millennial women are going to vote because it's a woman. They have choices. They are equal. And therefore, I'm not so sure that that's something. I don't know whether they would rather vote for. Let's say I'm a mom. I might rather vote for someone who represents my interests and my children's interests over voting for a woman. Let's say I'm in the military and I'm a woman. I might vote for someone who's strong on the military. So you cannot take millennial women for granted because they have choices. So that probably is probably is something.
Definitely. And Evan actually has one more question. Do you think that millennials rely too much on social media and technology?
No, this is your world. I absolutely do not. Look, you've read every Harry Potter. Look, I am not worried about your ability to read. You have read 700, 800, 900-page books. So this is your future. Your future is not the future of other generations. The future is smartphones, eventually smart autos, smart everything. And you are the generation that goes into that. So you have to have the skills. In fact, many companies are teaching people skills off of video games. That is fine. As I said, the only thing that I would say is keep an eye on millennials, that their people skills are kept up to par. But as far as, I'm always delighted that someone out there knows how to help me with something digitally, because it's not my thing to do. And it is going to be your thing to do and millennials' things to do. So I think it's great.
Definitely. All right, so I have another question. So how have tragic national events such as 9/11 affected millennials and their behaviors?
Well, it's made them very unusual parents. If you read, there's a new Time magazine article out. The cover says, "Help, my parents are millennials." Well, to switch to a different generation now, because millennials as parents are very protective. Why are they very protective? Because of 9/11, If you think about their children, if you think about their children are going to be overprotected for all the right reasons. They're overprotected at home because of kidnappings. They're and Amber Alerts. They're overprotected at school because of Columbine type incidences. And they're overprotected out in society because of terrorism. So here you have millennial parents who are raising a generation called Generation 9/11 that needs to be protected. They would be at fault if they didn't protect them. So it's, these are things that matter.
Definitely. So do you have a favorite influential or celebrity millennial, and why do you like them?
I guess my favorite would be Katniss Everdeen.
Oh.
In that I think that she shows all the strengths of a millennial woman. And I'm not leaving the guys out. It's just that I have just written a book on millennial women, so my references tend to go to that. So the guys are equally spectacular. But Katniss Everdeen is willing to put herself at risk for the protection of her younger sister. She's strong. She's battling good over evil. And this is a theme that runs through all millennials, good, men or women, is the battling of, for good over evil. Whether it is going out and volunteering and trying to help people that are less fortunate, whether it is protecting animals, whether it is saving the environment. Millennials are true warriors. And so someone like Katniss Everdeen to me is a great millennial role model because she's, I expect sales of bows and arrows to go up any day. It's just, she's a wonderful role model. So that would be my favorite picture.
That's a good one. I agree. I like her too. That's great. So there's another question here from Evan. He says, are you thinking of writing a follow-up book? Is there more to be discovered about the millennial generation?
I think, Evan, if I were to write another book, what I would have liked to have done would be to have written a book on each of the generations so that you could have a complete understanding of the Americans who went before you and the Americans who will come after you. And that way you have the complete picture. But if I were to write a book, it would be on the men of Gen X, millennials, and 9/11. Because somewhere in the feminist movement, we lost sight of our guys. And in trying to promote women, which was exactly the right thing to do, it does worry me that some of the men don't get the proper respect. And so I think I would take the men of 3 generations and focus on that, because sometimes I wonder if I know that there are wonderful reasons for giving young men Ritalin, but sometimes maybe they're just being little bullies. It worries me that that they are the last person to get a job, that everybody else is given preference over guys sometimes. And I wonder if we're trying to feminize them a little too much by making them have a display of feelings, feel it or don't feel it, but don't force. I like things that are natural to a generation. I don't like things that are forced on generations. And I will keep doing this all throughout this. I'll go back to the debates. They keep trying to force the candidates to be a good guy or a bad guy, or show them off in a good light or a bad light. You don't force people or generations to do things. You observe, you learn, and you respect it. But I don't like this idea of guys kind of being left in the dust a little bit. It's been great for women, but now maybe we need to focus on people and just say people instead of saying it's a woman's issue, it's a man's issue. Maybe it's a people's issue.
Definitely. So do millennials have any similarities with these past generations you've been talking about, or are they completely 100% different, no similarities?
There's 2 historians, Neil Howell and William Strauss. Historians have always known that there's a rhythm to history, but they documented that there are 4 generational personality types that keep repeating themselves. You only have wars under a certain personality type. You only have social upheaval under a certain personality type. But the millennial generation is the modern day version of the GI generation, the greatest generation America has ever produced. So this is why I'm saying you carry a tremendous amount of responsibility on you. because I call them the can-do generation, and I call you the can-do kids, because you have all the tools, all the talents, everything you need to be as great a generation as that generation was. That's a wonderful thing to be, but it carries a tremendous amount of responsibility. So from my research, you are the modern day version of the greatest generation America has ever produced, which is the GI generation.
Wow. Well, with that, I think we have run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today, Anne.
It was really fun.
It was really fun. I learned so much. I'm sure our viewers did too, and I want to thank all the viewers for tuning in today as well. All right. Well, thanks again, Anne, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. It was great fun.
Agreed. All right. Bye-bye.